a Rocky Mountain tour between maybe Boise, Missoula, Bozeman, maybe a stop in Wyoming, and then, maybe something like Denver and Fort Collins, Colorado, something like that. A Midwest tour, Minnesota, Wisconsin, whatnot. Definitely kind of an East Coast or Northeast tour, and a Southeast tour.
That was Jason Rolfe talking about a potential national tour of his new program, Writers on the Fly. We are on episode number 33 of the Wet Fly Swing Fly Fishing Show.
Welcome to the Wet Fly Swing Fly Fishing Show, where you discover tips, tricks, and tools from the leading names in fly fishing today. We'll help you on your fly fishing journey with classic stories covering steelhead fishing, fly tying, and much more.
How's it going, everyone? Thanks for stopping by the Fly Fishing Show. Before I get into the intro, I wanted to remind you again to follow us on Instagram. That's Wet Fly Swing. In today's episode, I interviewed Jason Rolfe, the man behind the Fly Tapes podcast and Writers on the Fly, a series of live readings by some of the best fly fishing writers around. Jason talks about some of his big influences along his journey and how he has been able to publish articles in some of the best magazines in the country. He gets into a few tips that will put you in the right mindset and make the connection to Patagonia, and a bunch of other great tips on fishing and writing. Don't miss this as Jason shares one of his favorite pieces about swallows. You'll think differently after this one. So, without further ado, here's Jason Rolfe from the Fly Tapes podcast. How's it going, Jason?
It's going good, man. How are you doing?
Good. Good to have you on the show here. I've been slowly working around as I've started this podcast, and I've been reaching out to other podcasters that are in the fly fishing space, and you're definitely one of them that stands out from the crowd. I think what you have going on is a little bit different from, I think, the rest of everyone out there. So I want to get into that, the story there, how all that started. But maybe you can first bring us back to, how you got into fly fishing, and then kind of maybe swing that into how, you got to where you are. And I know you do a little bit of guiding as well. So maybe you can just talk about that whole history there.
Yeah. I guess, probably the first part of it would be the first thing that brings me to where I am now, I guess, would be just that I always loved writing. Since I was a little kid, I was always writing stories down and making little books, and I loved reading as well. I loved learning about the authors, the people who wrote the books, and I would just get obsessed with learning about these people and who they were. And so, fast forward to high school and college, I kind of kept chasing that. And in college, I studied writing. I studied creative writing, fiction and poetry and whatnot. And then kind of toward the end of college was when I started getting into fly fishing. And I think it was right at the very end of college for me. So this would have been 2003. I just took like a fly fishing class at the sort of experimental college at the university that I went to up in Seattle. Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of how I started learning. I think actually the very first time I actually went out fishing was a little while later, probably a year or so later. And I borrowed my girlfriend's car, who is now my wife. I borrowed her car, drove up to the Middle Fork Snoqualmie River outside of Seattle, and somehow managed to catch a trout. So that was my first time fly fishing, and that would have been, I think that would have been 2004.
Okay.
Let me think. Yeah, that would have been about 2004. So yeah, then fast forward another 10 years or so, and I started working at a fly shop in Seattle. I'd kind of worked in in education for a long time, in different ways. And so I started working at a fly shop up in Seattle called Emerald Water Anglers, and Dave McCoy, who's the owner there, was really wanting the shop was brand new at the time. It's about 4 years old now, but he was really wanting to do some different sort of events and things in the store. And so I had this idea for this fly fishing reading series, because I had I'd been reading the Drake and the Fly Fish Journal and Thomas McGuane and Rodrick Haig Brown and all these great writers that I really loved. And at the same time, I missed one thing that I had loved in college. I think was going to readings, literary readings, poetry, fiction, whatever. Readings like that would happen, a couple times a month, and you'd go and it'd be a party and everybody would have a good time and nerd out about literature and words and whatnot. And so yeah, I just kind of had this idea, and that turned into this reading series called Writers on the Fly. And that started about 3.5 years ago. And so, yeah, it's just been kind of growing from there ever since.
Yeah. Yeah. That's awesome. I've definitely listened to a few of those episodes, and, one I listened to, I guess, Steve from, the editor of the Fly Fish Journal, a recent one. And, it's just cool. I mean, it just brings you down, to really that visceral feeling and it was awesome. I just listened to that one and really enjoyed it. So looking forward to digging into more of those. How does this whole, I guess, writing in general and fly fishing, is it different in how it makes you feel, or kind of the writing you do now and the work you're doing now around fly fishing? Is it pretty similar to what you've done in the past?
Yeah, I would say it's pretty similar. I mean, I always really, my first love has always been fiction, and especially writing short stories. The writer Raymon Carver is one of my favorite writers. He is a great short story writer, and so I've always loved that, and I've always loved, a piece of writing that has momentum to it and has a beginning and a middle and an end. And I think that story is incredibly important. No matter what it is that you're doing. And so I think that I've brought, in my own writing, I think I've brought a lot of that into, the stuff that I do about fly fishing. I think the stuff I do in fly fishing tends, sometimes it is maybe partly fictional, or at least I like to take a little bit of creative license with things here and there, and just like to, definitely. I'm usually not doing too much of just the straight essay. Okay. I went here, I did this, this happened, so on and so forth. So yeah, I like to mix it up and play around with it when I can. So yeah.
Cool. I'll provide links to some of the, you've noted a few writers and things like that. I'll do my best to provide some links here, and the show notes will be at wetflyswing.com/33. And I'll have, I usually try to get as many in there as I can.
Nice.
Yeah. So maybe, you talked a little bit about the Writers on the Fly. Maybe you can describe, your podcast, if it's different, how it differs from that, and maybe from somebody who's never heard it before, what it's all about. And what your plan is for the long term with it.
Yeah. Well, so the podcast, I guess it sort of stemmed from the Writers on the Fly reading series. And so the reading series itself, when I have one of those readings, the way the readings work is there's usually 4 or 5 writers who will, share a few pieces. Sometimes a person reads for 5 minutes. Sometimes they read for 20 minutes. It just depends on what they've got and what our time is looking like. And then the other thing about the readings is I usually like to include, I'll usually have a featured artist or artists for each event, just to kind of show some work and be able to talk about it. Like back in January, when we did a reading up in Seattle, Casey Underwood was there, and it was great to have him there. He showed some work, and then he also got to, get up and say a few words about, kind of what he does and why he does it. And I also like to always include a featured nonprofit for every reading, just to kind of, get the word out. Sometimes it's a fundraiser. Sometimes it's just kind of an awareness raiser.
So you're doing these at local fly shops usually?
Yeah, like sometimes at fly shops, sometimes at breweries. We've done it at a few different Patagonia stores in the region. So that has been, it all started out at Emerald Water Anglers Fly Shop up in Seattle. And then it kind of grew from there. In the last couple years, I've been doing this tour in the fall that goes from Bend up to Vancouver, British Columbia. And so that's been really cool doing that every year. And then hopefully this fall, I'm going to maybe take it out a little further afield and, hopefully go maybe do like a tour through the Rocky Mountains with it, or, I've got, people are constantly I shouldn't say constantly, but I've gotten emails from people all over the country saying, hey, you should bring this out here, bring it to the East Coast, bring it to the Southeast, whatever it is. And so, which is really cool. I mean, that is really, really exciting just to hear from people, to hear that they dig it and are enjoying it and whatnot. And so I think, that is sort of writers on the fly.
Okay.
And so, like I was saying, the fly tapes kind of grew out of that, in that I had all of these readings recorded, because I would record every reading that happened. And so I just thought, well, I'd love to get these. I'd love to use these readings somehow to put them out, to the world for people to sort of enjoy. And so, so I just kind of came up with this idea of, interviewing these folks that do the readings and including some of the readings. And I've also been able to interview a couple of artists. And yeah, just, really just kind of digging into sort of the creative side of things a little bit, and learning about not only, the writing and the art that people do, but just kind of learning about the people themselves and where they're from and why they do it, what brought them to, to the point where they're doing that kind of stuff. So, yeah.
That's great. Yeah, I think anybody that hasn't listened to any of those episodes, definitely go out there and check them out. There's some great stuff, and we have fly fishing. We always talk about this on this show, how small of a niche it is or whatever. But there's a ton of great, very talented writers out there. Maybe more so than a lot of per capita or whatever other industries. So we're kind of blessed in that way. Do you see that in fly fishing as well?
Oh, for sure. I mean, I just as far as like the number of writers and creative people.
Yeah. Just compared to other things. Like I think Steve might have mentioned that on that episode I listened of yours, the fact that like in mountain biking and other places, you don't have as many just as many great writers.
Yeah, no, I think it's totally true. I think it's kind of interesting to look at some of these other sports and realize they're definitely, I don't think there is, the sort of depth and not only kind of the depth of who is doing work now, but there's constantly new people, popping up in the magazines and the journals and whatnot, sharing new work. And so just kind of that growth is really cool, I think. And, it's kind of this never ending thing. But yeah, it's so rich. I mean, I think we're pretty lucky to kind of have an environment that really values this stuff and makes it available for us to, sort of consume and enjoy and support. So yeah,
that's cool. Cool deal for sure. So thinking, just about some of the people that you've either read or maybe folks that have been on your podcast, is there either a kind of a favorite story of yours, and maybe that's a hard one to do from your guests, or do you have another story from your life that is something that kind of either a kind of a favorite story or maybe a humbling story around fly fishing?
Like not necessarily like a published story, but just a story.
Yeah,
like an anecdote.
Yeah, just anything that comes to mind. I mean, I was just thinking, like, for me, I haven't listened to all your episodes, but that one with again with Steve talking there about the swallows, really hit home for me, because I mean, it's true. You're like, you don't think about them. I mean, you do think about them because swallows are awesome and they're flying around, but he just dug deep on that whole swallow story, and that to me just stands out to me as one of my favorites. So I don't know if you have something like that or something else in your life maybe that stands out.
Yeah. Well, no, I mean that swallows piece is definitely one of my favorite things that, favorite pieces of writing sort of in the fly fishing world. I think that's a really fantastic story.
Yeah, cool.
There's actually, so the episode that I just published, episode 17, which is just a couple of readings. There's no interview.
Okay.
It includes a reading from Langdon Cook. And actually, there's a couple of great people. So Langdon Cook was the guest on episode 3 or 4, I think. He's a writer up in Seattle. The reading that he did in the episode back then, which is about fishing with his little boy down in Southern Oregon, that's a really beautiful, just kind of not gut-wrenching story, but just a beautiful story that kind of it's so good and it's so full of love that there's almost something anxiety-inducing about it. That I really love. But then also this most recent episode, I included a piece from Langdon that is also, it's from one of his books. And this piece from Langdon is a little bit more on the funny side. It's a little bit lighter, but it's also a really great piece in that, Lang is not afraid to laugh at himself, and he's not afraid to sort of make fun of himself a bit. And, he's a fantastic reader as well, but he's also, he's just not afraid to, put himself out there and, let himself kind of be made fun of a little bit. And I think that really shows in the piece, and that sort of, I just always really appreciate that sort of vulnerability from writers, I think. Just people that aren't afraid to, just kind of bear it all a little bit. And so, really, definitely really enjoy that. But yeah.
Yeah. Nice. So, I was going to ask a question around the, a lot of times I'll like to ask, about mentors and things like that. And I know that I was listening to one of your shows. I think you mentioned a creative writing teacher you had in high school. That was a big influence. I think that's such a great point because, I've had a couple of great high school teachers as well. And, one of them was a fly fisherman, and he's a guy I still run into, to this day. And it's so important with kids, but, are there any other people that have really had that same impact on you throughout your life?
Yeah, I think that there's been people that have kind of come and gone, over time. I mean, that high school teacher, his name was Mr. Krupp or Lester Krupp. He is definitely the reason that I write now, and I'm obsessed with writers. I just, I loved his English classes and his writing classes when I was in high school, and that really filled a huge need for me when I was that age, and just like dealing with family stuff that, I was dealing with at that time, and just dealing with, kind of growing up and learning how to sort of, move through the world and whatnot. And so, in a lot of ways, like he was huge for me. And, I don't know if there is anyone that has had quite that sort of impact on me in that sort of mentorship way since then. I've kind of bounced around doing lots of different things. I would say that Steve Duda as an editor has definitely been for me in my writing, I guess. Steve has definitely been a mentor in a way, just in that he's really helped me sort of grow with it and fine tune a lot of things and discover some things. Yeah. So
what has Steve,
that's been big.
What do you think Steve has taught you? What are the things that stand out? What he's taught you about, writing or fly fishing or anything related?
Just on the writing side, he's just got a really sharp eye for kind of, cutting out the unnecessary stuff that inevitably ends up in a story, and all. I mean, when I write a story or an essay, that I'm gonna try to submit to a magazine or the journal, I'll write it, and then I'll spend. I put a lot of time into revision and editing. I mean, I'll go through pieces 5, 6, 7 times, just refining and changing a word and changing a comma and cutting out a sentence and rearranging a paragraph and so on. And what's funny is I'll spend all that time, and then I'll send it to somebody like Steve, and I'll get it back from him with comments. And I mean, he always nails it with, the thing. And it's just one of those things that you realize, like, oh yeah, he's totally right. That like this sentence is too opaque, or, this character needs to be developed earlier in the essay, or, whatever it is.
Yep.
And that's so hard. I think that's one of the most difficult things as a writer, is to be able to look at a piece of your own work objectively, and to be able to kind of get that distance from it. And so, I mean, that is exactly the job of an editor, is to be that objective, that objective set of eyes that can just say, fix this, this is great, fix this, all right, it's good. So
yeah, how do you get that? If without an editor, how would you recommend somebody get that distance? I mean, I guess just taking a break maybe from your writing, but are there other ways to, you write a piece and then you want to step back a little bit? Do you have any tips there for somebody that's maybe struggling with that?
Yeah. I mean, I think taking a break is a big one. And sometimes taking a break might be, you might put it in a drawer for a month or more, whatever it needs. Whatever needs to happen for it to become less familiar to you. I think another big part of another big thing that I like to do, which isn't the most environmentally friendly thing, but I will print it out in different ways, and I'll usually print it out multiple times, and usually, I try to reuse paper and whatnot,
Sure.
but and I'll print it out in different formats. So I'll print it out just like a regular printout. I'll change the format so it's in columns and print it out that way. And just kind of change the appearance of it on the page so that you can, I think that makes it feel a little less familiar, and it makes the sentences flow differently.
Mm-hmm.
Reading aloud, reading it aloud to yourself is huge. I think I spend a lot of time doing that sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
I've never recorded myself reading a piece for editing purposes, but I know that I've heard a lot of people will do that. They'll record themselves and then listen back to it, and that kind of will help get a sense of like, oh, that that sentence flows terribly. So
and I guess you've done that on. I mean, you've recorded yourself on your Writers on the Fly. Have you listened to those episodes and found things that you might change there? Or
the only thing, well, yeah, I guess I recorded myself for that Writers on the Fly reading in January, reading a piece, but that was a piece that had already, I had already been going back and forth with Steve on.
Oh, okay.
And so,
gotcha.
And it hasn't been, so that one felt pretty dull. The only other time I've recorded myself, I mean, that recording was at a reading, so that was a little different to go back and listen to. I did record myself when I did an interview with Jay Johnson, who's one of the co-founders of Pig Farm Inc.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I want to check back with you. I had some questions about that. That's cool.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. So a couple of years ago, I actually wrote a piece about Pig Farm Inc. for the Fly Fish Journal.
Oh.
And so for that episode with the interview with Jay, since he wasn't a writer, I figured, well, I'll read the piece that I wrote about Pig Farm Inc. because it's kind of a little bit of an introduction to Pig Farm Inc.
Cool.
And so,
and where could we find that?
The story.
Yeah.
That is, it's the episode. Gosh, it's like episode 12 or 13 with Jay Johnson, on the podcast.
Gotcha.
And then that was in the Fly Fish Journal a couple years ago.
Oh, nice. I
can't remember the issue off the top of my head, but probably issue 7 point something.
Sure.
So yeah, and that was just I went down to Colorado to visit my family and ended up hooking up with some of those guys down there that are involved with Pig Farm Inc. and kind of involved with the beginnings of it, and just had a great couple of days hanging out with them, and ended up writing this piece about that experience. So
cool. Yeah, I'll definitely have to. I'll provide, like I mentioned before, provide a link to that in the show notes as well. I'm interested to hearing that. I think I commented on that in a couple of past episodes of mine, just on the pig, because I hadn't heard of it before, and I was listening to it, and it sounds really interesting. So I'll let people, if they want to check it out, go to the show notes and check out that link.
Oh yeah,
funny.
People should. I mean, and the cool thing about it is it's Pig Farm Inc. is everywhere now. The whole idea was to just create this crazy community of people doing all this fun stuff and spread it all over the country. And it's like, it's all over the place. And so, people can get hooked up with, other folks that are involved with it, all over the country. So
yeah, exactly. No, that's great. They're building sounds like a pretty cool community there. So, I want to check a little more into becoming, a better writer, because I know that's something I struggle with as well. Writing has never been my strong suit. But before I get there, I wanted to see if maybe you could talk a little bit about, if you have a home river and, what species you fish for most. We mentioned the guiding at the beginning. Is steelhead kind of you consider your home river and home species?
Yeah, somewhat. I mean, I love steelhead and I love guiding for steelhead, and that's what I do in the wintertime out here. So I live in Olympia. I'm a couple hours away from the Olympic Peninsula.
Oh,
wow. And so I guide on the peninsula in the wintertime, and yeah, I love it. I mean, emerald water, I guide for emerald water anglers, and we're a swing only operation, and it's my favorite time of year getting out there. And sometimes I'm teaching people how to cast a spey rod for the first time and how to swing flies for steelhead, and other times I'm just taking somebody out there who knows what they're doing and they just want to make sure they're on the right water or on the right runs and whatnot. And but I love that. That's definitely my sort of favorite guiding time of year, definitely.
Okay.
And then other than the steelhead stuff, which I do out there on the OP, and I guide a bit throughout Western Washington, up on the Skykomish and the Skagit and whatnot as well. I would probably say that the Puget Sound is my sort of home water. That's kind of my year-round fishery for the most part. It's kind of where even though I caught my first fish up on the little creek outside of Seattle, I always kind of think of the Puget Sound as kind of the place where I learned to fish or learned to fly fish, because when I was first starting out fly fishing, I didn't have a car, and I lived in Seattle, and I could get to the beaches on the bus. So I would just load up all my fishing gear, hop on the Metro bus, and go to the beach and fish for a few hours in the morning if I could. So,
nice.
Puget Sound, the Puget Sound is definitely what I would consider sort of my home water up here.
Okay.
So,
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we've had a couple of guests at least that have talked about the Olympic Peninsula and fishing there. I think we had back on, I think it was actually episode 2 and episode 15, had a couple of different guests that went into some details on fishing up there. So, yeah.
Nice. Who were those?
I had Jack Mitchell, who has, he's got the shop out in Yakima, but he guides up at the OP. And then Jeff Layton, who I can't remember where I met him, but he's got, I think, a site, Grab Flies. And yeah, but he I guess he doesn't technically do as much guiding as, I guess, more teaching.
Cool.
That sort of thing. But yeah, but they both went into some good details. And, for me, I still haven't been up there. So it's, it's on my, I guess on my bucket list, but I need to get some time to get up there and do it. But yeah, it sounds like an amazing place, and God, you got, national parks, around you and all that stuff. So it sounds pretty amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. It's cool. I mean, it's definitely a special spot, and, faces it's facing a lot of difficulties right now, of course. But I think that there's a lot of things to be optimistic about as well, and so a lot of signs that things could be going in some more positive directions as far as the fish numbers and the health of those runs as well. So
sure.
It's a struggle, but it is what it is.
It is. There's a lot of impacts, and yeah, I mean, you're up there in Puget Sound and all those areas. I mean, there's it's not going to get any easier as more people. I don't know if more people are filing in, but I know the Portland area continues to grow. So as more people come, it's going to be harder to decrease those impacts. But I guess the important thing is to protect what we have to start there.
Yeah, for sure.
Cool. So yeah, let me get back to just that writing, because again, like I mentioned, it's a little bit of a struggle of mine. So do you have any other tips, or maybe another tip you might give somebody who's maybe a struggling writer? I've definitely written, plenty of blog posts, and, it seems to me like the ones that hit home are the ones that, are really, those down deep where you're kind of digging on it and bringing something out. And, do you have any tips of helping people get there, or do you think it's just kind of, you just continue to write?
Yeah, I mean, I guess tip number one, and I would only say this just because it's a tip that I have heard, given to me so many times, is just, step number one is just to write, and to write and to write and to write, even though you think it might be terrible, and it may very well be terrible. I think there are very few writers out there, from Hemingway to whoever else. There are very few writers out there who, get it right the first time. And so I think just knowing the importance of revision and editing, and just getting words on the page, and then, being able to go back and work on them, is huge. So I think that's the biggest thing that, a newer writer, or just somebody who is, trying to kind of improve things, is just get down, sit down in front of the computer or the typewriter or the notepad or whatever you've got, and just get words on the page, because you can always spend time fixing stuff later. I mean, as far as digging deeper than that, I think it's almost hard to say, just because, everybody finds stories in different ways. Things jump out to people in different ways. I think, like if you and I think you and I could have the same experience. Let's say we go on a fishing trip and something wild happens, right?
Yeah.
More than likely, we would both tell that story in very different ways. And so I think of a lot of it as just, maybe trusting your instincts, and trusting where your sort of brain and your heart, I guess, as well, wants you to take a piece of writing, whether it's more creative or less creative, whatever it is. I think just kind of trusting those instincts, and letting your instinct for how the story should be told, kind of come through and show through a little bit. Other than that, I mean, it's, I don't know. I think it starts to, excuse me. I think it starts to get a little bit to one of those points, to the point where it's hard to teach.
Yeah, sure.
Or it gets to the point where it's one of those things that can't be taught.
Yeah. Totally.
Otherwise it's just a matter of, kind of learning the mechanics of how a story goes together, and learning, beginning, middle, and end. And I mean, I think, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, you're just reminding me of, like, I can't remember the quote, but Stephen Pressfield, talking about, just doing the work, just doing, like you said, just write. And I think that's a big part of it, that I think he was the guy that, I don't know what he spent 20 years without getting anything published. And then it was like, nothing. I mean, just denial. And then finally, The War of Art, I think, finally hit, kind of resonated with people. And I mean, you know, I read that thing and it was just like, wow. I mean, you know, it was just amazing talking about the challenge of, you know, just you can kind of look into that book and what it's all about. But yeah, I mean, that's a good story there where he struggled for pretty much his whole life. And at some point was basically living in his car. You know, it got so bad, but he was so passionate and dedicated to it that he eventually came through. And I mean, not everybody has to go through that, but it's just a point that some people do.
Yeah, and I think that's a good sort of illustration of the fact that, you know, if you put enough time into it, you know, you can do it. And I think it really, you know, for people who are maybe trying to get into writing or are struggling with it a bit or whatever, it really does come down to how much work you put into it. I think, you know, for some people it might come really easy and they might just write this brilliant stuff that just rolls off the pen or whatever. And that's that. And other people have to work at it more. But, you know, if you do put that work in, you know, I think that you'll find that it starts to come easier and you start to recognize right away, like, oh, this is good, this is bad, this is, you know, and you start to be able to just make that stuff happen quicker. So, yeah.
So I was going to check with you on just thinking about some of your favorite, you know, magazines or resources, and I know that might be another hard question, you know, as far as favorite magazines. But are there any, you know, fly fishing related resources that you enjoy or you think other people, you know, might be interested in? Whether that's magazines, books, you know, other podcasts, things like that.
Well, I mean, within fly fishing, I think, you know, the Fly Fish Journal and the Drake, you know, they kind of have the market cornered on, you know, kind of the best writing about fly fishing is obviously in those two. magazines.
And does that come back to, sorry to interrupt, but do you think that comes back to the you know, a big part, the editor and that whole thing? I mean, why? Because there are a number of different you know, publications out there. Is that kind of where it starts?
Well, and you know, I think it is I think it also has a lot to do with the goal of the publication. You know, there's other magazines out there doing cool stuff, and I've talked with other people about this, but you know, Fly Fisherman Magazine or Fly Rod and Reel or American Angler, you know, those magazines they're
different.
They're good for what they do, but they're different. They're, you know, they're more like how to, where to, you know, that kind of thing. And so
they're not going to talk about swallows, you know,
exactly
that sort of story.
They're definitely not going to expend, you know, 2,000 or 3,000 words on, to somebody that hooked a swallow on the side of the river. And so, you know, I mean, Tom By at the Drake, you know, I mean, the Drake is 20 years old. And the, you know, I think both Tom and Jeff Galbraith at the Fly Fish Journal, you know, from the beginning, they set out to do something different from that. They didn't want, you know, it's not about how to, where to, it's about the why. You know, why do we fly fish? Why do we care about this? Why do we spend all this time out here doing this thing? And so, you know, I think that what's cool is that they, you know, I think both publications have really sort of cultivated, you know, this culture that supports these writers and gives these writers a place to share their work and gives people, you know, a place to learn about that work. And, you know, Gray's Sporting Journal does the same as well. And so, you know, I think as far as just sort of those print periodicals, you know, that stuff is great. But I mean, there's always great books being published, I feel like.
Yeah.
I just started reading a book by this guy named Chris Dombrowski or Dombrowski the other day, that is just kind of about his experiences traveling to the Bahamas and to chase bonefish, and it's so beautifully written. It's just a fantastic book, and it shows he studied poetry in college, and it really shows in just his attention to words and his attention to little details and whatnot, and and so I mean, just the fact that stuff is it continues to come out, and it continues to to show up, and so I think that there's I think that there are great examples of good stuff to sort of chase down and whatnot and learn from. So and that's exciting. That's really exciting to me.
Yeah, that's cool. And the Drakecast, I've chatted with Elliot a little bit. I think the podcast there is similar to to their publication, in that it's different. I mean, Elliot's doing it different. He's got a kind of a cool family background in the, some of the audio shows. So
I didn't realize that he was related to,
I know,
that dude from Radiolab.
Exactly.
I think it is, right? Yeah.
I know. Yeah. It's pretty awesome. Yeah. I met with him at the film tour, chatted with him a little bit, and, cool. Yeah, and he gave us a shout out to some of our at the end of one of their episodes, which was cool. But yeah, we're actually now. I'm kind of in a transitioning mode with the podcast here. We're season 1 was all steelhead, and we had a bunch of episodes, and now we're kind of transitioning more into trout and some of this other, some other topics. So nice. But it was cool to connect with them, but you see it with the Drake, how they're just they're a little bit different than what some of the other people are doing out there, and that's not to say what other people are doing is bad or wrong or whatever. It's just a different way to do it.
Oh yeah, totally, just different. I think so, for sure.
Nice. I was wondering, I've gone through this before myself. Well, I'm still in the middle of it, but I know you recently have a new child, and I was curious to get your take on it, since you're early in on it. How that's changed your perspective on things, and maybe whether that's writing or fishing or life, and maybe you could talk a little bit about, how all that, how that's changed things, and where you're going from where you're at now.
I think that I almost feel like it's like still too early to say.
Yeah, that's true. That's
what I mean? It's like my little boy is 3 months old, and he's awesome.
Yeah.
That it's been great, and things have definitely changed a bit. And so I think a lot of it, for me, as far as just my writing and trying to get out fishing and stuff like that, obviously you have to kind of be a little more selective with your time and how you're using it. And, I've found on, days when I'm home with him and I'm trying to get some writing done, it's just, you just have to kind of take what you can get. And sometimes that's 30 minutes and sometimes that's 2 hours. And you take that 30 minutes or 2 hours and you just do what you can. And then you go back to feeding him or changing a diaper or taking him for a walk or whatever. But I mean, I think my wife and I both, even before he was born, we talked a lot about just trying not to let things change too much, trying not to let things be too disrupted, like not using him as an excuse, and maybe excuse probably isn't the right word, but not using that as an excuse to not go camping or to not go fishing. Like,
That's right.
Even if it's going to be more difficult to go camping with him or to go on a road trip in the van or to, go fishing for an afternoon, like we're going to do it and we're going to help each other do it too. I have fly fishing, which is something that she doesn't really do.
Mm-hmm.
She has mountaineering, which is something that I don't really do.
Wow.
And so I think, we want to also support each other in doing those things that we both, love on our own.
Sure.
And so making sure that we, that we allow each other to get time to still kind of chase those things as well.
Gotcha. Are you guys,
and then, and then, just making sure that on the other hand, that, we're including him in as much of that stuff as we can as well. So,
yeah, no, are you guys going to be shooting for a few more, or are you going to sticking with one kid?
It seems like probably sticking with one.
Mm-hmm.
My wife hated being pregnant, so
it's not,
she's
they're much tougher than we are, that's for sure.
Oh my God, yeah. So I think she's probably fine there, and I think I think I'll be happy with one. I have 5 younger brothers myself,
wow.
so
wow.
I grew up with a big family, and
yeah, there you go.
I would be fine with a small family. Plus, we have 2 dogs and 2 cats.
Yep. And you guys have plenty going on.
Yeah, 5 new chickens, so we've got plenty going on.
Awesome. Cool, Jason. Well, man, we're well into this show. I had a few more questions I want to ask you here before we wrap things up, and one of them, I'm just starting to think a little bit more about those bucket list, destinations. We mentioned one, the OP for me, but God, there's a bunch of them, right? I mean, as fly fishing grows and you hear about all these stories of Mongolia and Africa and all these, remote things. Is there something on your list that's kind of, kind of high on your list, or something you want to definitely get done before the end of the day?
Well, I've never been to Alaska, so I'd love to go up and fish for some of those big rainbows and salmon and whatnot in Alaska. That's kind of maybe a slightly easier one.
Mm-hmm.
I've always been kind of intrigued by the idea of kind of going up into northern Canada and fishing, fishing for big pike and char and whatever else is up there, kind of in the Yukon or the Northwest Territories, just like kind of way out there in just where it's real remote. And I always thought that would be cool, but yeah, I mean, again, those are both kind of a bit closer to home. I think a little bit further afield, maybe Atlantic salmon in Iceland.
Oh yeah,
Atlantic salmon anywhere really, but I think Iceland would be a fun place to fish. So
yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
for sure.
Just really expensive.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's part of the thing. I'm kind of working on something here myself, trying to find a way to get myself up to some of these areas for a little less money, sort of thing.
Yeah.
So kind of the DIY deal. So hopefully I'll have a little more information on that to help people get up to some of these. But yeah, I mean that's always the struggle, is that there's definitely, well, not only the cost, but there's a time component too. Which is not easy as well. But no, that's awesome. Those are 2 good places. I spent a little bit of time up in Alaska fishing for salmon. And yeah, for me, man, the coho was definitely a unique experience, because you're stripping in coho up literally to your feet in some of these places. They're so aggressive. It was absolutely amazing.
Yeah.
That's great.
For sure.
Awesome. Well, so thinking back to the show, the fly tapes and Writers on the Fly, maybe you could talk just a little more about, what we can expect coming up here in the next, you said you've got some different tours. Do you think, as you look out over the next few years, are you kind of thinking that far ahead and where you want to take this, or are you just kind of thinking back to, this fall?
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, as far as the fly tapes, I really hope that I can just kind of keep cranking along with what I'm doing, and hopefully I can keep finding. I mean, it shouldn't be a problem to find writers and artists to talk to and post an episode every couple of weeks.
Yeah.
That part's pretty easy because there's a lot of them. I mean, I know a ton of people up here in the Northwest alone. Not to, and then I'm going to Colorado at the end of June, and I'm probably going to meet with some folks that I know down there and talk to. And so, hopefully keep doing that and definitely start, reaching further out and hitting up people on the East Coast and doing some of that. So yeah, I mean, the fly tapes itself, the podcast, I just want to kind of keep doing the same thing. I don't really foresee changing the formula too drastically. Sure. And I don't think that there's going to be any shortage of people to talk to. And so, yeah, hopefully I can get at least a 2 or 3 more years out of it. And
nice.
if I get more out of it, then awesome.
Yeah.
As far as the reading series, Writers on the Fly, I mean, like I said, I think I'll be changing things up a little bit this next fall with the tour, and possibly including fewer writers, but at more locations. If that makes sense.
Yeah,
so rather than
sure.
having, lots of different changing it up, trying to have it more like having kind of a core of 3 or 4 people that are going to travel to more of the locations. But we'll see how that goes. I mean, it's tough because there's so many great people out there that I really want to include. And honestly, like, it's just hard to find the space. I mean, I had some great writers even last fall that, Dylan Tomina, for example, who wasn't on the tour this past fall only because when I was planning things, he didn't think he was going to have the time, so I hadn't included him in my schedule. And then once the tour started going, it turned out he had a free evening on for one of the readings, and he was like, "Hey man, I can still do it if you want." And I was like, "Man, I wish I could, but it's just like, at some point it just ends up being too much." So, but definitely, hoping to get some tours going in other places. So, do like a Rocky Mountain tour between like, maybe Boise, Missoula, Bozeman, maybe a stop in Wyoming, and then, maybe something like Denver and Fort Collins, Colorado, something like that. A Midwest tour, Minnesota, Wisconsin, whatnot. Sure. Definitely kind of an East Coast or a Northeast tour. And a Southeast tour, and it's I've talked to people in all of those places. The communities exist in those places. The writers exist. I've talked to people who have offered their help and sort of knowledge of the places, and so really it's just a matter of like sitting down, doing the planning, finding the financial support for it. Yeah. I mean.
How do you find that financial support? Is that something where you just pull it out of your own pocket, or do you plan on doing some things to help promote and pay for things?
I mean, really the tour itself. So the Cascadia tour has happened the past 2 years in the fall. So 2016, 17, that wouldn't have happened without, Patagonia.
Oh, right. Okay.
So, I kind of got to know some folks there and who were just really supportive of it and really wanted to see it happen, and just said, what do you need?
That's cool.
let's make it happen. And so I've been super lucky to have the support from Patagonia. This last year also Sage, Sage helped out as well. And the Fly Fish Journal has helped out as well for both of the tours. So that's the Fly Fish Journal has kind of been there from the beginning. They've always sent raffle prizes and, free magazines and whatnot. So, I mean, the Fly Fish Journal, they've been a huge,
that's cool.
Huge supporters from the get-go. But yeah, it definitely wouldn't be possible without Patagonia.
Yeah.
It's certainly not. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, how does Patagonia fit with, thinking of your plan or your mission or vision or whatever, of what you're doing? How do you think, why do you think they supported it so much? I mean, it sounds like you knew some people there, but I mean, obviously Patagonia's a big company on conservation and doing some amazing things. What was the connection there? They just see that they're getting the word out and this, kind of the writing.
I think for Patagonia, it's just, they want to support, I think that they really want to support people that are just doing new, weird, cool, interesting things. Obviously they've got their books division. They've got Patagonia Books, which has published, a bunch of really great stuff. But even outside of that, I think just, if you look at the stuff, whether it's a film or whether it's this reading series, or whatever it is, if you look at the things that Patagonia puts their name on, the Dirtbag Diaries podcast is another good example. It's all about good stories and people who really care about something, and care deeply, care passionately about a certain thing, whether that's surfing or conservation or fly fishing or, whatever it is. Like, I think that's all it is they want to support people that are kind of chasing those sort of deeper, deeper places of connection or deeper moments of connection with, sort of the natural world and what have you. So
gotcha.
I think it's pretty straightforward as far as that goes. Like they just want to support that stuff. So
I hear you. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
And, I was just thinking, we talked a little bit about this at the beginning, but as far as, an episode of the podcast, is there one? I mean, I look at stats, for my podcast just to keep up with things. And I know I have one that stands out, on mine. I, interviewed Deck Hogan, and it was a little bit of a controversial podcast because it was about, kind of his last book, the publication and stuff there. But, that one has obviously had way more hits than, anything else I did. And, whether that's good or bad, I kind of see that. Do you have one as well that kind of sticks out? And do you know why, it's had so much, activity?
So the interview that I did with Riverhorse, Nathaniel Riverhorse Nakadate, that it's not it didn't necessarily get a whole lot more activity. They're all about the same as far as like the number of downloads that they get and whatnot.
Yeah.
But the number of comments and emails and everything that I got about that episode was way more than any other. And I think it's just because Riverhorse is just he really wears his heart on his sleeve. Mm-hmm. He's not afraid to say it like it is. He's not afraid to just put himself out there, and he's also had, he's really kind of chased it his whole life. I mean, in that episode we talk about, his surfing when he was younger and playing in bands and playing guitar and fly fishing and all these things and he's lived a pretty funny, interesting, kind of crazy life, and he's a great storyteller, and but like I said, just such a heartfelt guy. And what's funny is that episode got the one negative comment that I've seen on, but what's really funny is the comment is just something like, I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe let me pull it up. It's really funny.
Oh, cool. I was going to say, that's the thing about the negative ones, you got to have, your haters. That shows you're doing some good stuff out there.
Oh yeah. Yeah. It says, I listen. So this is an iTunes, iTunes comment. It says, I listen to every episode and always enjoy, except the one with River Horse. I listened to the entire show trying to decide if he is for real. It was like listening to Cheech and Chong. If you don't know what that is, YouTube it. It might have been more tolerable if I'd been stoned. Which is like,
that's not, yeah.
It's hilarious to me because, first of all, like, River Horse is totally for real. And, he definitely has his own, way of telling stories and whatnot. And that's what I love about River Horse is, like, he marches to his own beat. He does things his way, and he's a really, he's a really caring, and just a unique dude who approaches the world from a certain perspective, and that's how he does things. And so I guess maybe if that didn't quite come through on this episode, it was that is what it is. But this is all just to say that episode and that conversation obviously had a big effect on a lot of people, and I was getting emails and Instagram messages and blah blah blah, and so it was just kind of funny to see this one comment, and I don't know, it just cracked me up to see this one comment on there. I've
got one on my iTunes. It happened early on, and it was a 1-star, and it kind of killed me that day. I was like, oh man, it was early on. I just had started the podcast. I was like, wow, 1 star, man. Geez, people hate this thing. And and it was so funny because I think it was later that day. I think the guy somehow sent me a message or something like that, or I can't remember what it was, but basically he said, oh man, sorry, I accidentally wrote 1 star. I meant to write 5. And so he just screwed up, and I guess iTunes doesn't let you take them back, or he couldn't figure it out. So that was kind of a funny one for me. But no, I think it is good to have, to have your haters, like I said, because, you don't want, the polarization is kind of a good thing, right? You don't want to be kind of in the middle. You want to have a voice, and you want people to really love you and people to really hate you, and all the in between.
Yeah.
So
for sure.
Good.
For sure.
Well, I think we're about there, man. Wanted to just check with you and make sure you let people know where they can find you if they want to get in touch with you or have questions about anything.
Just as far as like email and whatnot.
Yeah, or just do you have one of your websites, or do you have a place that if they want to just or email or whatever, or social?
The website is probably the best spot for everything. It's got the podcast and the readings, and it's got some film stuff that I've done with some filmmakers. So the website is syzygy.flyfishing.com, and that's spelled SYZYGY flyfishing.com. And people can totally email me there if they have questions or comments or whatever. I'd love hearing from folks that are digging this stuff, and I've actually, I've met a lot of new writers through people just getting in touch with me as well. So that's always really cool. But other than that, I don't use Facebook quite as much anymore. It seems to be less and less useful for things. But the Writers on the Fly Instagram, I try to throw something up there whenever I have some new news to share. And
sure,
every once in a while, if I catch a fish, I'll put a picture of a fish on there. But
nice.
So yeah,
all right, good. Well, I'll provide links to all those resources in your website you mentioned as well. And Jason, I appreciate you coming on here and chatting here. I definitely I have a better perspective on what it takes to be a writer and do the things you're doing. Like I mentioned in the show, it's definitely not easy for everyone. So appreciate you taking the time to do that. And the podcast and everything is awesome. Looking forward to this fall. Hopefully, if it works out, I can get up and maybe visit one of the show or the Writers on the Fly. That'd be great, man.
Yeah, for sure. We should be coming through Portland again in the fall. So
perfect.
So yeah. Definitely.
All right. Well, thanks for everything, and we'll hope to keep in touch with you down the line.
Yeah, man. Thanks so much. This was great. I appreciate it.
Okay. See ya.
Bye.
So there you go. If you want to find all the show notes with all the links we covered, just go to wetflyswing.com/33. It would be super exceptional if you could leave a quick iTunes review. No problem if you can't, but it will help other people find the show and get the word out there. And I would love to hear what you think. If there's other things I could be doing or guests and things like that, it would be great to hear your feedback. You can always just send me an email at dave@wetflyswing.com/.com/contact would be the easiest one. And thanks again for stopping by to check out the show today. I'm looking forward to catching up with you soon and hope to connect with you online or on the river. Later.
Thanks for listening to the Wet Fly Swing Fly Fishing Show. For notes and links from this episode, visit wetflyswing.com. And if you found this episode helpful, please subscribe and leave a review on iTunes.